right now we're buying another building. It's 27,000 square feet. And it's crazy. This is how I know the people. I sold them the building. We owned it in 2007 and sold it to this company called Talkaphone.
Welcome back to another episode of Keeping It Real Estate, brought to you by Granite Towers Equity Group, where we delve into the depths of real estate investment, unraveling insights from the industry's best. I'm your host, Mike Roeder, and today we have a very special guest with us, a veteran in the industrial real estate arena, Joel Friedland. Joel's journey through the industry over the last 42 years is nothing short of remarkable. From co-founding Epic Savage Realty Partners to pioneering his unique approach at Brit Properties, Joel's story is one of resilience, innovation, and unwavering commitment. So Joel, with that, it's an absolute honor to have you with us today.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to see you too.
You bet. So let's kick it off by, rewinding the tape. You've been in this industry for 42 years. How did you initially find yourself in the world of real estate investment?
So right after graduating from the University of Michigan, I went on the search of a job in real estate, and a friend of mine knew a family that owned 80 industrial buildings in the Chicago area, which is where I lived. I'm from the suburb of Highland Park, which is north of the city. And they told me this family was just a big player in industrial, and I didn't even know what industrial was. So I cold called the family, and I went and I met with the father and two brothers. Their last name was Podolsky, and they'd been in the industrial real estate business since the 1960s, and they were syndicators. And they had an industrial real estate brokerage company. So I interviewed with them and was hired literally on the spot. In 1981, when I started, interest rates were 17%, and they had 10 vacancies. And my job was to drive around in industrial parks where they had buildings and cold call industrial companies to try to pull them out of industrial buildings they were in to move into the Podolsky's buildings. So I became an agent. And I was in that role for 10 years, and they were my mentors. Steve Podolsky and his dad, Milt, and a fellow named Richard Levy. And I have to give them credit because literally I talked to each of them almost every day, including weekends.
That is incredible. So they pretty much served as your mentor as you went through the business. You were the agent, and then obviously you eventually stepped into the world of investing into industrial. So do they still serve as your mentor, or?
Well, Milt has since passed away.
Okay.
His son, Randy, and his daughter, Bonnie, I'm not involved with them, but the son, Steve, who is the oldest child of the three children, is now 75 years old, and he has served as my mentor for all these years. And in fact, he still invests with me, and I haven't talked to him since yesterday.
I love it. That's incredible. And I'd love to ask you too, I love that you worked in the industry and then you started syndicating properties, down the line. How crucial do you think it was for you to gain that knowledge upfront by working in the industry or having that mentor before you started to actually invest in your own projects?
So I've seen something really interesting in the world of business, really in the world of every profession also. I don't know if you've seen this or noticed this, but there are so many family businesses out there, especially industrial companies that manufacture products and distribute products. Mm-hmm. And the reason that they're family businesses is because the founder built a big business and hired people and built the business up, and then needed a succession plan, had to figure out what was going to happen to the business as he or she got older, and also eventually passed away. They need a succession plan. So the Podolskys, at the point where I was working with them, had two generations, but years later they had a son-in-law, they had a daughter working there. There are just so many families that do this. And the people who are the children of the founders become mentored, a lot of them right at the dining room table every night. And it's interesting because my son is in the business and he's 28. I have a partner who's my co-equal partner, but my son is learning the business. And I'm guessing my partner who has 3 sons, his kids might be in the business. So that's what happens. But when you're lucky enough to find somebody that's great at something and they teach you how to do it, which is what I had. I was so fortunate to have the Podolsky family, that if they're experts and you stick with it and they show you the ropes, you can become an expert. When I started my own company, it was very hard to leave the Podolskys, but it was a family and it wasn't my family, and they refused to adopt me. So I couldn't be part of the family. So I started my own business with a group of 3 other guys, and we built it up. And then we mentored. It was like paying it forward. We mentored 70 real estate agents who were industrial real estate brokers.
Absolutely incredible. And I love that your son is involved in the business as well. I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about that, Joel. How old is he? When did he come into the business, and how has that worked so far?
Well, he's 28 now, and he started out after college being an outdoor adventure travel tour guide, and he loved it. And then COVID came, and people stopped going on trips. Families would go with him into Yellowstone, and they'd go in a van. Everybody was really close to each other. So when COVID sort of upended his career, he said, "Hey, Dad, I need to figure out what to do." And I said, "Should we talk about you coming into the business?" And we did, and he's doing very well with it. In fact, we're currently in Florida. That's why this palm tree theme is behind me on these chairs. We're on our month in Florida, and Sam came with me, and I said, "This trip we're going to talk all about financing," because he's newer at this. He's only been doing it for 2 years. And we do most of our deals all cash, no mortgage. So he hasn't learned about financing. So I said to him, we were at dinner the other night, and I said, "This is going to be a trip about learning financing, how to do bank debt."
I love it. I mean, that's incredible to bring that around the family table and to get him integrated. Have you learned any lessons having him on your team? I know sometimes it can be tough working with family. I've heard from some individuals, that are experts in the industry in multifamily that, they brought their kids on, but only after they've had, another occupation, or if they've worked with another company, which it sounds like Sam did. Any lessons learned on your side?
Well, I've seen a lot of family businesses, and what I've learned is that most families don't get along with each other. Siblings. My mother was telling me that a friend of hers used to say to her kids, "Stop fighting, stop fighting." And my partner, Eric, he's got 3 young boys who are in their teens, and they're constantly tackling each other and fighting. But there is sibling rivalry, and when somebody brings family members into a business, there's a very big risk that there will be resentments and grievances, and that really hurts families badly. And I'm doing everything I can to not have any conflicts with Sam. There has to be a lot of acceptance of each other, how we do things that we don't agree with. There has to be this level of sort of forgiveness also. When I make a mistake, he has to forgive me fast. And Believe me, I make a lot of mistakes, so he has to forgive me a lot. These family businesses can be tough, and I've seen fathers and sons and fathers and daughters who don't talk to each other anymore. And if it's a second or third generation family, I see cousins who hate each other. So family businesses are very tough. And the only thing I can say is they need a psychologist. They need counseling to learn how to accept and deal with each other.
Yep. I completely agree. And I think you can relate to that whether you have a family business or not, because the individuals that you're working with, they almost become family. And so you need to learn how to work with each other. You need to, understand roles and responsibilities and be very clear from the start. So I appreciate you sharing that. Joel, I'd love to rewind. So you talked a little bit, or you mentioned that you do most of your deals debt free. And we were talking a little bit about this before, this podcast. I'd love to hear, what led you to that decision. Was it always like that? And what are the biggest benefits, to doing deals, debt free?
Sure. So over the years, I have acquired about 100 industrial buildings. around the country for a number of years, and now only in the Chicago area. And very specifically, only near O'Hare Airport or in the city of Chicago, which we call infill industrial because it's where the population density is the greatest and the highway system is the best. So, yeah, I was an owner of 50 buildings with a group of investors, 200 investors, back in 2008. And I can almost remember when the Lehman Brothers catastrophe happened and they went out of business. And the whole economy just sort of crashed in a matter of just a couple of weeks. The 50 buildings we had put debt on all of them. We thought we were being really conservative by keeping our debt down to 50 or 60% loan to value ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that when things are bad, tenants leave. Or tenants call and say, we can't pay the rent. And so I had 10 vacancies in 2008, and I went into just a devastating period of time where I'm telling you, like, very openly that I was in a clinical depression because I thought that I had lost my whole portfolio because the banks have no sense of humor. And the way the loans work, if you're at a bank and you have 7 loans at a bank and one of them's in trouble, they put your entire relationship into the workout department. And workout departments are full of people who are really difficult because they're always ready for a fight. Because almost everybody who's about to get foreclosed on, they're fighting and figuring out a way to stall. So that they don't start out with, oh, I trust you. Now I'm taking one of your buildings. I'm going to foreclose, and I trust you, and let's work together. We're going to take you to the point where it's good for us, and it's too bad if you don't like it. You're going to have to put more equity in to all of your deals, not just the one that's in trouble. So I became extremely uncomfortable with the feeling of the emotional turmoil of having these workout people after us. I really got lucky because I had wonderful partners and they were supportive. And when we needed to shore up deals with cash, they came through for us. But I came to the conclusion as I worked really hard to save the portfolio that debt was the killer. And so I decided that from then on, I wanted to do all of my syndications with either zero debt or with a maximum of 30% loan to value. And that's what we've done.
Got it. That makes sense. And that's, very powerful. The lower your leverage, obviously, the less risk. And, looking at our portfolio, we've brought our leverage down. And in multifamily, it's a little bit different because you have hundreds or thousands of tenants, and hundreds of tenants on each property. So even if you have some, individuals or some tenants vacate the property, you still have a pretty good occupancy rate. Whereas if you're in retail or if you're in industrial or some other type of commercial asset, like you're stating, it sounds like that can be devastating if you have a bunch of vacancies and you can't fill them right away. So I love that method. Are you able to, obviously you're able to get the returns that you need. How are you able to find properties that underwrite well with that low of leverage? Because obviously when you don't use leverage, typically the returns go down. But how are you finding those properties, Joel?
Okay, so sourcing is what we call it. We source properties 3 different ways. Number one, there are industrial brokers in every city and in many rural areas also. And most of us who have been in the business for 5 years or longer are members of an organization called the Society of Industrial and Office Realtors. It's got thousands of members. We have conferences every year. And I can call someone, it's called SIOR, Society of Industrial and Office Realtors. I can call somebody, for example, if you were in Minneapolis and I talked to you and said, hey, do you need an industrial broker? I could call 40 different people and say, hi, it's Joel Friedland. I'm an SIOR in Chicago. And they would treat me like I'm their best friend. So in Chicago, the hundreds of industrial brokers, it's such a vast market that there's so many brokers. We all know each other really well. So they bring us deals. They know we're buyers. They know that we pay all cash, no mortgage. That's one. Another way is we actually go cold calling door to door in industrial parks. So Sam, my son, and Eric, my partner, have gone, like they park their car in an industrial park on Industrial Drive and start walking door to door to door and walking inside of a manufacturing facility. And they ask to see the CEO or the owner and say, hey, would you consider selling your building? That's truly off-market buying.
Mm-hmm.
And we have bought 95 of our 100 buildings off-market.
Wow.
Only 5 through brokers, which is crazy.
Yeah, that is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then the third way, which is really great, is I'm 64 years old. I've been in Chicago in the business for a lot of years, and we're laser focused on Chicago. We have 19 buildings here now. And I know so many people. I did 2,000 brokerage deals when I was an industrial real estate broker. And many of the people that I know own buildings and have owned them generationally and call me and say, hey, we have a family situation. We sold the business. I'll give you 2 examples. One of the people that I knew, his name was Bob Steiner, and in the 1980s, he started a company manufacturing safety products for the welding industry. You know, welders have those shields over their faces, and they wear protection, and they also have to have these screens so that people walking by don't look at the flame when they're welding, because the flame hurts the inside of your eyes. So someone actually makes those screens and makes the gloves and makes the protective apparel, and that's Bob Steiner. So he started this business from scratch, built it up, and then sold it to a company called Bunzl that's on the London Stock Exchange for I don't know how many millions. And he owned the building. It was 33,000 feet on Tripp Street, which, by the way, is the street where Walt Disney was born in Chicago. So it's a famous
Interesting.
street. Yeah. And Bob called me one day and he said, Joel, I've owned this building and I've been leasing it to Bunzl, the company that bought me out. And my 2 children don't want to own an industrial building, and I'm 87. He said, would you consider buying it? I said, Bob, I'll put together a syndication and I'll bring in investors. I said, I need an 8% yield on an all-cash deal. He said, that's fine. I said, okay, so that's $2.4 million. Yeah, that'd be great. So he agreed to the $2.4 million. I put it under contract to buy it, and then I went out and I raised the money from, I think it was about 40 people. Our minimum's $25,000 for investors, and a lot of people put in 50 or 100,000, and some people put in 250,000. And we bought the building through a relationship. And right now we're buying another building. It's 27,000 square feet, and it's crazy. This is how I know the people. I sold them the building. We owned it in 2007 and sold it to this company called Talkaphone. And they make, when you go to a parking garage or a university, you know, they have those posts with the emergency phones with the blue lights. And it's like if someone's being chased. Help me, someone's chasing me. And it goes right to the security people at the university or in the garage. They make those. So Talkaphone's the name of the company. And the family, they called me and they said, we have this building and Dad recently died and we don't know what to do with it. The kids don't want it. Would you buy it back? So we're actually buying it back. And Talkaphone will be our tenant. And I'm raising $2.1 million. Again, minimum $25,000. Probably the average investor is $50,000. And some people want to put in $500,000. We can't even take them because we don't have enough. Our deals are too small. But we're going to buy it all cash, no mortgage, and we'll just own it. And it's an 8% return for the first 4 years and a 9% return for the next 5 years.
Got it. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And, you know, it sounds like you're laser focused on Chicago. That's where you live. You know, you have boots on the ground, obviously. You know, in the multifamily industry, the majority of multifamily investors that I know tend to stay away from Illinois just because it's not landlord friendly. It takes, 3, 4, 5 months to get tenants out if they're not paying their bills. I do think that other commercial assets are different because you're not dealing with hundreds of tenants. But if you could explain why it's appealing to you to invest in Chicago and Illinois and how those landlord laws affect you, that'd be great.
Sure. So commercial and industrial, there are no landlord laws like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. So that's not an issue. The reason that we love Chicago, first of all, let's look at the industrial market for the whole country. The industrial market has been booming because of the internet and because of some insecurities about companies manufacturing products in China or other places overseas. Instability, supply chain, the need for having products to be made that you can get your hands on nearby. So Mexico has a lot of manufacturing, and the United States has a lot of manufacturing. And I've heard this statistic, over 90% of the companies that occupy the kind of buildings which are class B and C industrial that we have are entrepreneurial manufacturers or distributors. And those are companies that need to be in every major market. And they also need three things that Chicago has. Number one, we've got rail, trucking, and air for transportation right in the center of the country like nobody else. We also have fresh water, an unlimited supply in Lake Michigan. So food companies love being here because they use thousands of gallons of water every day. But the biggest thing is the size of the market. We have 16,000 industrial buildings that add up to 1.5 billion square feet. Every institution, every pension fund is clamoring to own industrial in Chicago because of the location, the natural resources. The electric grid is really important to manufacturers, and our electric here is fantastic. So there's a lot of places that industrial companies have to be and want to be. And Chicago is probably one of the top three. Very often it's the top number one. So if you look at what insurance companies and pension funds are looking for investment, first of all, they love industrial, and second of all, they love Chicago. And we are just like a little player under the radar of everybody buying the smaller buildings that are older buildings that are, one more major thing, not replaceable because there's no land where we buy our buildings. There's a constricted supply. There's zero supply of land, and very rarely do buildings come available in the size that we buy for lease or for sale.
What advice would you give to new investors entering the market, the industrial market? So both active investors and then also passive investors as well.
Mentorship. Somebody has to be helping to teach this business to whoever gets involved with it. I mentor investors as well as mentoring brokers, as well as mentoring acquisition people, because investors who don't know what industrial is and they want to learn about it, I'll take them on a tour. I did a tour with my friend Cliff, who's one of our investors, about 2 weeks ago, and I drove him around. We were just driving I have a big GMC Yukon, and I said, we're going to go in the Yukon, and I'm going to take you to see 5 of our buildings in 2 hours. And because they're all near each other, we went to each building, we went inside, we looked around, we met the tenants, I introduced him. And as we drove around, I explained how it works. We want an 8% yield. We want annual escalations in the rent if we can get them. We want credit-worthy tenants. And we want to have buildings that have good geometry, which means really good loading docks, higher ceilings, which is important so you can stack products up on racks. If the ceiling's too low, you can't put as much stuff in there. And believe it or not, the number one most important thing in all industrial buildings, parking, because you can't have employees and you can't grow your business if there aren't enough places for them to park.
That makes total sense. And that's something that we pay close attention to on the multifamily side, because parking can become a huge issue. You know, if you have a 200 unit apartment complex and you have 100 parking spaces, I mean, people aren't going to want to rent there because they don't have a place to park. So
you're dead. So you know that, right?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I love how you mentioned that mentorship is so crucial. Regardless of what type of investing you're going into, make sure you find an expert and you learn the industry and the investment class before you jump in. Or, jump in passively with someone that knows what they're doing and test out the waters that way. So, Joel, with your extensive experience, where do you see the future of industrial real estate heading, across the country, and then also, markets like Chicago?
Well, first of all, I think that there's been a bit of an overbuilding of the very large warehouses. I'm sure when you drive anywhere in the entire state of Minnesota, every time you get near any city of any size, there are these gigantic warehouse buildings that are concrete. It's called precast concrete or tilt up, with loading docks lined up and trucks lined up. I think that space has been overbuilt everywhere, because if money's available from investors, especially pension funds, developers have nothing to lose to sort of gamble on building one and hoping they get at least. But they don't consult with each other, so a whole bunch of them were all built at the same time. And at some point, there has to be a market equilibrium that gets bashed. Like, all of a sudden, right now there's too much demand and not enough supply. You build a giant 300,000 foot building, boom, you lease it right away. I think that's going to change. When I was in the early part of my career, there were a lot of buildings available. You couldn't find a tenant for those giant buildings. So I think there's going to be some sort of a reckoning. I don't think it's going to be terrible, because companies are still growing. The internet's still taking out a lot of retailers. Every time a store goes out of business, a warehouse gets built. That's what replaces stores. And manufacturing's still going to continue coming here. But I see a downturn coming. It's been too good for too long. The smaller buildings, the supply is so constrained, I don't think that it's going to be a disaster, but there could be a downturn. They could go down 10 or 20% in value.
Got it. And has that not happened at all in the industrial space? Has it continued to rise? Because I know multifamily, we've seen a 20 to 30% reduction in values and in prices because of the interest rate environment. That hasn't happened yet in the industrial space.
No, industrial is always the last one to feel anything. Industrial is 6 months behind everything else. When things go bad, we're the last ones that feel it. And when things turn around, we're the last ones who benefit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, I appreciate that insight. And Joel, looking back the last 40 plus years that you've been in this industry, what are some of your biggest learning lessons? I know we talked about debt already. Any other learning lessons or mistakes that you've made that you've learned from over the past few decades?
Yeah, the biggest thing is that knowing a lot is not as important as having relationships.
Mm-hmm.
A person who knows everything but isn't good at building relationships will get trounced by somebody who has really strong ties with people who are players in the industry, owners of companies, owners of properties. And it's really all about knowing each other. If I don't know my investor's story, if I don't know what they did for a living, where they came from, how many kids they have, how many siblings they have, if I don't know all that, it means I don't know them well enough. And if they don't know that about me, they don't know me well enough. When I was first in the business, I used to think that if I had a lot of information, I could put things together. It's not about the information. So the main thing I've learned is that it's connecting with people, because the only people who can help you and the only people you can help are people that you know well, because they have to know what you need and you have to know what they need.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Trust and relationships in this industry are both instrumental, to creating success. So completely agree there. And, Joel, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. If our listeners want to get a hold of you, how can they reach out and contact you?
Sure. We have a new website. Sam and Eric just put a new website together, Brit Properties, BRIT with one T, properties, plural.com. And we have a contact us form on there, and a lot of content about what industrial is and how it works.
All right. Fantastic. Well, I appreciate it, Joel. Have a great rest of the week, and thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our channel and leave us a 5-star review.